Artlist.io.
Get down in the car, one time give it all, bust it open hard, let me see you drop. Get down in the car, one time give it all, bust it open hard, let me see you drop.
Music licensing reimagined.
I fucked up this hustle, baby hustle, but the oh my I fucked up this hustle, baby hustle, but the oh my what is my guys, know that they fly, know that they ride or die.
Hey, good morning. This is Jared and Nate over at eCarrierCheck. We're excited to be here today, a Friday. We've got an incredible show today. We're going to be talking to Chris with Truckers Against Trafficking. This is something that I'm excited to raise awareness on and just really bring it to the house. But, before we get in with Chris, obviously I'd like to break down the week with eCarrierCheck and talk about the week and how it's gone. Right. Nate, give me a rundown. How's the week? What was some of the highlights?
Yeah, for a short week, it was still pretty busy. Even Chris had a busy week, which is good. But it's been a really good week. Did a lot of training this week. Even had one this morning. But it's been a good week.
I love that.
Yep.
I love that. I know I had the opportunity to do some sales stuff with some people, and I just like to connect with different aspects of communicating. Obviously sales is communication, and boy, it was fun to be on there and help some people out. But definitely a short week.
Yeah.
So
you could tell.
Yeah, exactly. Nate, obviously take us home here. Give us an introduction.
So
who we dealing with?
So we got Chris on. I'm super excited. Truckers Against Trafficking, and the reason. Obviously they reached out to us, which I was really super glad about, but we were able to see like the exhibit down at TIA and, Jared and I, there's not really words for it. It was just really,
it touched my heart.
It touched our heart. Yeah. That's the way to put it.
Yeah.
So we were like, man, we need to provide some awareness or maybe some value for our viewers here. So, when you guys reached out to us, Chris, we were like, we got to get you on the show. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, Chris, welcome. It's exciting.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me, really, TAT in general. Obviously, my name's Chris. I'm what they call an industry training program specialist at Truckers Against Trafficking. And, a lot of what I do is just communicate on board and with all the trucking companies that come through and make sure that we help them navigate the ways that they can really be a part of TAT. And it's ways such as this, jumping on webinars or live streams just to bring that awareness and let people know what TAT is and what we do for everybody out there.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah. And for those of you watching, obviously, Chris is here to take questions. We've got quite a few questions as well, but I know, Nate, you were going to show a quick video just to do some quick education, let people go, hey, Brian, what's up, man? Good to see you. I wonder where you're at. Put where you're at, man. I love to see where you're at. So we're going to show a quick video, though.
Yeah, I'll pop on this video here and let me get this going.
Was this time where one of my hardest moments was this time where my trafficker picked me up and another girl, and she looked high, and we weren't allowed to do drugs. He turned and looked at her, realized she was high, pulled the car over, told her to get out. He took her behind a building, and then he came back to the car without her. So I don't know what happened to her, but I never saw her again.
Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. There are 40 million people enslaved in the world today. Human trafficking can and does happen anywhere.
And these victims find themselves in situations they literally cannot get out of.
People are oblivious to anything else happening other than their own world. I was there, and I saw that you didn't see me.
This is happening in our neighborhoods, in residential homes and apartment buildings, but it's also happening in commercial areas, in your local communities, in your local businesses.
Local drivers are very important against human trafficking because they're out there on the road. They are able to see things that law enforcement can't necessarily see. They're at these houses, they're at these different locations. They see these different signs, different telltale signs, and they report back to law enforcement what they see. So they play a crucial role in the fight against human trafficking.
Join our mobile army. Be those eyes and ears. Law enforcement cannot be everywhere at once. It is imperative that we, the general public, that we become activated, that we are looking, that we care enough to get involved and make a call that could help end the nightmare for a victim of human trafficking.
Chris, thanks again for sending that video over. That was great.
Whew, that was heavy. That was really heavy. It was a good video. The obvious question to me, Chris, for me is, if I'm a driver, I'm out on the road. How do you recognize these signs? What can drivers do when you're going to a Love's, you're at a truck stop, whatever you're at? How do you recognize this? Like where we go with that?
Yeah. So I'll first say that obviously we have a lot of materials that we provide to those who want to take the training and really know how to recognize and report what they see, potential trafficking situations. So that video or that trailer is specific to our local drivers training, but we do have training specific to those areas of over the road or long haul truckers, as well as in-home and moving delivery personnel. So people who are in and out of homes, your local drivers such as sanitation workers or those final mile companies such as Amazon who drop packages to your door. And then again, those long haul truckers. But some things to really recognize and see when you're in these destinations is, first, I always tell people gut feeling. I think most of the time people understand or have that, inside physical feeling of, hey, this is just not right. Or there's something really weird about that situation. But taking it a step further and trying to really recognize those red flags. So in this situation, is somebody look like they're disheveled? Typically victims of sex trafficking today are women and girls of color. So in those situations, is it this child who looks scared with another adult human who is, kind of urging them or pushing them along? It could be, in cases of any victim, do they have any kind of branding on them? Do they have, a name on their bodies, whether it be, along their side, their neck, their arms, because sometimes they do get branded by their pimps or their trafficker, kind of like as an I own you situation. And then if you're able to have a conversation with a potential victim, do they talk about making a quota or do they not know where they are? Because typically traffickers will move their victims from place to place, so they don't know where they are. So they don't know who to ask for help. And if they are trying to, escape or get out of that situation. But it's just small things like that, red flags. And I mean, we have specifically what we call a wallet card, small bifold card. It honestly has all the information you would need in order to recognize red flags or have those questions that you could potentially ask someone in that situation.
Yeah, that's good input there. Honestly, when Jared and I were having a little sit down yesterday, this is not just for people in the trucking industry. Like when you go to Walmart or, to the grocery store, mini mart, these are things to be looking out for, So I think it's a message that needs to be everywhere, not just truckers. Obviously, those truckers are everywhere. We can't be, which is huge. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting. And, this is something that we'll definitely be doing some more looking into, and like, how can we better ourselves and spread the word around where we live? We live pretty close to the interstate. So, this is good.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris, what are the normal, give us some statistics.
Yeah.
What are you seeing as far as ages? You mentioned colored women. give us a rundown. What are they normally looking for as far as statistics? What do you
Yeah, I mean, statistic wise, first, I know that video kind of touched on it too, but human trafficking, the exploitation of human beings through that forced radical coercion for two purposes. One is commercial sex, so the stuff that you see like prostitution, brothels, your pimps, those types of areas. And then it's also forced labor. So those being held against their will, being forced to work long hours. It's stuff like sweatshops and agricultural fields or construction sites. But what we know is that globally, there's actually over 50 million victims of human trafficking today, and they generate that $150 billion for their traffickers just within 365 days. So every year, that's what's happening. And as we've said, disproportionately victims of trafficking today are women and girls of color, but it's also disproportionately that the buyers of these women and girls are white men. So it's just one of those, concepts that we need to understand that most typically, you're going to have children who are kind of entered into the sex trade because of vulnerabilities that they might have. So a lot of the time, traffickers will really scope out, whether it be children or women that have these vulnerabilities, such as, coming from foster care or children who are exiting foster care and, trying to get out of those situations. But it's also children who run away from home, who come from abusive homes, or even the LGBTQ community who, are experiencing that pressure or disapproval. It's those types of vulnerabilities that they exploit for that profit, because they know that they can use their tactics of coercion, very heavy manipulation, to tell them that this is what they need, or this is all that they're ever going to get, or this is the best that they'll ever do in life. And considering that it's mostly children from the ages of 13 to 16, I mean, you can be heavily influenced within those age periods, and something that traffickers do very easily.
How long? Man, this is really deep. How long are these victims trafficked, if you will? Like, are they in this network? Are they in this for years, decades? Is it? I mean, is it just or is it 6 months?
It's dependent. It's a variety of time. I mean, for example, we have what we call survivor leaders on our staff, and a lot of what they do is go out and tell their stories. But specifically, one, her name is Liz, and she was trafficked by her mother in her own home. So from the ages, I believe, 13 to 18, she was being trafficked just in her own home. So she would go to school. Different men would come pick her up from the bus stop or at the school itself and do what they need to do and then take her back home. So it's just dependent. I mean, sometimes it can be a decade, sometimes it could be a couple of decades, but then there's situations where it might be 6 months, it might be a month. All in all, victims themselves, there's a study out there by the Polaris Project, and it's actually said that victims today might be forced to have sex up to 20 times a day. So let's say a victim is held against their will for a month. There's still, this tremendous trauma and a lot of activity going on within that month, that it could be a month, it could be a year, but all in all, it's still a huge traumatic experience for those who go through that.
Boy, I can imagine.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know, Chris, how does Truckers Against Trafficking address the unique needs and the support of recovery of survivors of human trafficking? What do you do to support those that are trying to recover?
Yeah. So for one, Truckers Against Trafficking, we're not a hotline. We don't take tips. That's specifically going to be to that number you have below, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, or your local law enforcement. But as far as that goes, we provide a lot of awareness and education for the transportation industry. And as we're always trying to grow and improve our networks and our guidelines or regulations at TAT, we I know for one, really working on trying to compile this list of very sound companies or organizations out there that we can provide to whether it be, you know, trucking companies or just our partners out there, of really safe places or homes that these victims can go to. I mean, when victims themselves do manage to exit their trafficking situation, they then have to embark on that journey of rebuilding their lives. And during that period, they will need the support to manage, you know, mental as well as physical health concerns, and then really working to vacate criminal records that they might have accrued during their exploitation. But just making sure that they get that stable employment and then the housing needs that they might need, and then all that, you know, constructive therapy and all of those resources later on. So just working on a list to have that, you know, those organizations or companies out there that where these victims know where to go.
You know, Brian just asked probably one of the more interesting questions. He says, "Is this what actually? This is a professional driver that drives all over the place. Great step deck guy." He asks, you know, how do the traffickers and potential buyers find each other? What a great question. I mean, how are you selling this service? I mean, this is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so many ways, and specifically now with the technology that we have, you know, there's social media is a huge one, and then just your listing platforms. For example, Craigslist. There's a lot of people who will put ads on Craigslist, and people will follow up, call, and ask what they might need. But social media, I mean, it's, you know, sending out pictures or those spam accounts that try to follow or try to get into the networks of kids that are on there, and really trying to coerce people. Or, you know, it's a lot of the time people think this is, you know, a back alley or a blacklisting site where you're going to find this info, but most of the time it's right in front of us. And a good example of that is having, you know, Craigslist, or a lot of people use OnlyFans as, you know, these newer systems, these newer platforms coming out. I mean, it's just right in front of us a lot of the time.
That's so interesting. You know, just to go off on a random tangent, but I want to tell you a random story of it. You know, you can drive to work, and really, when you get to work, you probably don't even remember, you know, driving, right? The difference between unconsciously and consciously doing things. And it's so interesting when we go to different places with like my kids, I'll always ask them. I like to ask them questions like, "Hey, did you see that guy in the blue?" You know, or I'll ask them observatory questions, because if you don't, you're just going to Walmart and walking the aisles and you're done, right? But if you're observant, you'll know and see things. And it's so important that we're not just, we got to look. It's right in front of us here. You know what I mean? Yeah. You got to be observant. You got to consciously be looking and saying, what's going on with that?
Right. And I think the only way to do that, and Chris, you might agree too, I think you will, is to educate ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. Like we definitely got to educate ourselves on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So you mentioned that, you know, Truckers Against Trafficking obviously has educational platform that you're building on. You'll run us down here. What are the different classes that people can join?
Yeah. So TAT started in 2009, and we really had a mission to educate, equip, empower, as well as mobilize those members of the transportation industry to combat human trafficking as part of their everyday jobs. Most of the time, they might be in situations where, you know, law enforcement might not be. So those rest areas, those truck stops, where they might dock to pick up their loads, and all those situations. But a lot of the resources that we have, you know, our first goal being saturating that industry with our materials. I showed you our wallet card. This is a great material to have, but we also have decals as well as brochures. We have templates for you to use in training, specific to training videos or DVDs that we provide those companies that want to know more information. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but we have over the road training, and that's specific to those long haul truckers who go from one side of the country to the other. But we also have training for local drivers, so specific to those sanitation workers or those final mile carriers. and then also in-home delivery personnel. So if you're moving and you have hired a company to, box up your stuff and or put it in a truck for you to move it to your destination, those being able to recognize when they're inside. And we also have training specific to law enforcement on ways they might be helpful for them. And then just, those are honestly, we have so many trainings, and those are all available on our website as well. But just seeing some of those or hearing about it and being able to recognize that there's obviously a lot of industries out there, and we want to be specific to how that might help that person's needs.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Tyler Killer had a good point. Do authorities look at the buyers of the sold workers? And he followed up with another comment too. I just feel that there's a lot of focus on the traffickers and not the purchaser, like the people buying. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think authorities, are they going after the buyers or just mainly the sellers?
It's here and there. I mean, obviously, it is illegal on both halves of that. And that's one of the reasons that we really work with law enforcement or government agencies, is to kind of bring that awareness and education and work together on how we might be able to change that narrative. A lot of the times, I mean, I mentioned, when victims, if they're able to exit out of those situations, a lot of the times they might have to really work on, extinguishing the record that they accrued during exploitation. But that's because a lot of the times, it's the prostitute. Prostitution is illegal, but a lot of the times it's the prostitute or the victim themselves who's being, arrested and booked because of prostitution, when in reality, that person's being forced to do those things against their will. A lot of the time, I mean, it could be the buyer can get, arrested, but also the trafficker or the pimp themselves. It's very elusive on how they play the game. I would say most of the time, honestly, it's the victim who's being arrested and taken for those actions.
That's interesting. In my mind, and obviously, sometimes my mind works like a movie. With these victims, can they run away from the situation? How do they get away from this? Like, in my mind, I'm like, they're just going to run down the street and we move on, right? But obviously there's people that are in this over and over. Are they manipulated by drugs? Are they manipulated by fear? What seems to be kind of the how do they get away?
Yeah. And hugely, it's that sensationalized imagery of, I mean, I think all of us can agree that we've seen some type of movie. The one that pops into my mind is Taken. A lot of people think it's exactly like that, but more often than not, it's these situations. We mentioned force, fraud, or coercion. It's manipulation, and a lot of the time that we know that these instances don't come from kidnapping, although trafficking is commonly associated with that issue. More common cases actually come from pre-existing relationships. So that could be, for instance, casual online dating. This could be through friends or family members or intimate partners, where somebody is forced into trafficking. But it's actually where most common cases begin, that it is almost half of the identified cases out there actually began with a family member's involvement. So with that being said, a lot of the times, when a victim needs to get away, it's not running away, or it's not, asking for help, because most of the time it's their family member who's putting them in that situation. And when you think about the manipulation that's involved with that, you just have to understand that they think that, this is where they're supposed to be. And they think that this is all their life will ever be. Specific to those adults who traffic, younger women or anybody within those age ranges, when they find themselves in that situation, or they might be dating their pimp or in a romantic relationship, they truly believe, whether the trafficker tells this to them, it's, if you just sell yourself one more time, or if you just bring in a little more, then you can stop and we can live happily ever after. It's just those situations of, it's not really running away or screaming for help, or being locked in a basement, or having chains around your ankles so that you can't escape. Most of the time, that's not how it happens at all.
That's insane. So, Chris, obviously, what a heavy subject to be talking about. Can you give us maybe a couple success stories, or that you've got some wins? You know what I mean? Like, we're talking about a pretty bad situation,
Yeah.
but what are some of the wins that your organization's seen or had in the last year, 6 months that have really brought this to light, if you don't mind?
Yeah. And I'll say we actually just had our Harriet Tubman Award presented this past weekend at the Indy 500. So Protective Insurance, our great partner, they actually give us a platform to have, a success story within the industry. We're about to share that. I would love to share that story, but we are, I think, waiting till next week to kind of, have the big bang for it. But a success story specific to, this is a little older, and I will say it's my favorite story to have in lectures or presentations. So you might have heard of it. It made national news back in 2015, but this took place at a Virginian truck stop. And it was specifically a woman and a man, Laura Sorensen and Alder Hadza. They were both arrested in January of 2015 at that truck stop. But according to the report or everything that played out that day, there was an officer who was called to the scene of this truck stop, and he was allowed inside this RV. So Sorensen and Hadza had an RV parked outside this truck stop, and somebody had called in and reported it because of suspicious activity. This officer came out, was allowed inside the RV. Sorensen and Hadza, they were super chipper, hey, how are you? Come on in. Let's have a talk. Yeah, we'll answer all your questions. And they advised that they were on vacation and that they were visiting their daughter. But when the officer was able to really look around and check the scene out, he noticed a young woman in the back, and she was exhibiting signs of malnutrition and just seemed really frightened in that situation. So he escorted her out, and it was immediately that when she was out of their premise, beginning or weeping and really begging that officer to not let her go back in the RV, that she was in fact being held against her will, and that she had been sexually as well as physically abused by that couple. So she let them know that they had threatened to kill and injure her family if she didn't comply with what they were needing. That she stated that that she had infections all over her body, that she couldn't remember the last time she had anything to eat or drink, that they had actually branded her on her back, and they had actually lacerated her feet after she had attempted to run away. So when they caught her, because she did attempt to run away, they caught her, they physically abused her, and then lacerated her feet and said, hey, you're not going to try this again, in essence. But after all that, obviously local law enforcement came out there and were able to take her out of the scene. And fortunately, where TAT comes in and why we really see this as a success story is because that woman is back home with her family in Iowa, and Sorensen and Hadza are currently serving in prison for the next 40 years. But where this all comes into play is because it's actually called in by a former Conway truckload driver, Kevin Kimmel. And it was his training with TAT and his ability to really recognize those red flags, people coming in and out of the RV from that truck stop, coming in and out. And then really when that young woman was peeking her head out of a window and being violently pulled back in, that he recognized and had that gut feeling of, I know this isn't right, and calling in local law enforcement and being able to really have that trickle effect of that woman being able to go back home and be safe. But a really, really good story, and a good example of what training can do, that awareness, and then just having the will to make a call, a simple call. That's all it is.
Yeah, for sure.
Whew, man, really?
It's a lot to
That's
take in,
intense. I mean, that's terrible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, at least, I mean, I love the success of it, that somebody had the training, the ability to recognize the situation. You know what I mean? So that's insane. I mean, gosh dang, there's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I would be curious, obviously, we want to help. We would like our users and viewers to help. How do we get involved further? Is it, do you disperse the cards? You mentioned the cards a couple different times, but how do we help?
Yeah. Obviously we're always looking ways to improve. My sole purpose really at TAT, or majority, is to communicate with those companies to onboard and take that training and really distribute all of those materials to make sure drivers and personnel or staff, administration staff, are aware of what to look for, and just being educated to tell other people about it. But it's also navigating ways that you could further partner, whether it be having webinars or live streams such as this, or going to different parts of the country and having those in-person conversations with staff about, this is what trafficking really is, putting away the myths that a lot of people might have, or those preconceptions or misconceptions, and then really providing people with the necessary tools to train their own people, or give them opportunities to have events together. I'll say a really good resource. I always say our huge or our biggest resource at TAT is our Freedom Drivers project. So it's a 48-foot long show trailer, and it's basically the inside of a museum, and it has artifacts that we have been graciously given by victims of trafficking, and it really just tells their story of, this is what I was wearing, or I had this all to my name and I was being trafficked, and then just really delving into those stories. But so much information. I'll say we're very education based. So our biggest priority is always making sure that we're educating those on what to look for and how to report that, or what they might see.
Yeah, the education part is huge. We kind of had the opportunity to talk last week, but this sort of training should be done by everyone, whether it's once or twice a year, because we can go through the training and then 3 months from now we kind of go on with our life and forget things, right? Yeah. So these are the kind of trainings and educations I think everyone should be doing once or twice a year, every year, just to help you stay up to date with the technology, or just educate yourself on new trends or whatever. So, for everyone watching, definitely go sign up for a training. Chris's contact information is on the About Me here. So definitely reach out to her, see what you can do to get set up.
And if you get the chance, Nate and I were at TIA, this last, few months ago, we saw this trailer. We got to see this museum. Just incredible to walk through. And it just touches the heart.
Yeah. And the people at, TAT there, I mean, we walked into the exhibit and, I can't remember her name, but she was super,
wonderful person.
Made us feel comfortable, asked us if we had questions, it was awesome. So we'll definitely, when we see an exhibit, we'll make sure to visit and, shake some hands over there. So
yeah, absolutely. Chris, obviously before we go, what's the next 6 months look like for you? What's TAT doing? Obviously you're getting ready to announce this large award. I'm excited for you guys there, but what's the next 6 months look like? What are you trying to, get maybe a grasp on, or get a deeper educational aspect to?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm currently working on is I communicate with all 50 state trucking associations and really make sure that we navigate all of those networks and partnerships, and just making sure that staff as well as their members are very aware and input with, Truckers Against Trafficking, and then the education we provide. So I'll say really, and this was talked about last week on, a couple of goals for the rest of the year is how do we immerse those STAs further in to the concept of really outputting, engagement in this area to make sure everybody knows about this education. And I actually will be attending their conference, the TAC conference out in Rhode Island this July, just so that we can further connect and really make a stronghold on those partnerships and let us all be on the same page to really understand, these concepts of trafficking, and then really just making sure we recognize and support our partners in every way, because we obviously know that they're doing a lot of work because they are their own entity or business, but they really go out of their way to provide this training or implement it within their, onboarding sessions or just regular safety training. So just making sure we recognize those out there who are really doing the job of making sure everybody's aware of this information. So really working on those networks to keep pushing the word and the engagement.
Yeah, it's so important to be involved in your state or local trucking associations. We live in the middle of nowhere, Chris, so we don't have a local trucking association, but the state of Nebraska does.
Yeah.
And we enjoy, the content that they bring to the table. Chris, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. What an incredible education. Obviously, people can reach out to you, take a look at the website. We would sure love an opportunity to help any way we can to help educate and keep going. So thank you for being on.
Yeah, and I appreciate the time. Anytime that we can get to really spread the message and the word we're going to jump on the opportunity. So we appreciate it. We really do.
Well, yeah, we'll most definitely bring you on again. I think this is something we should probably do, like I said, once or twice a year, and just keep everyone educated and keep that awareness. So yeah,
absolutely. Chris, thanks for being on. Nate, obviously, we at eCarrierCheck, people are looking for carriers all the time. There's something to be said about helping people out with that. So we'll definitely put something on our website and try to help out with that educational aspect. So I loved this interview. It was really entertaining. It was just just so educational. So
definitely,
I love it. Chris, I hope you have a great Friday. Thank you for being on. Nate, thanks for being a rock star, brother. And we'll talk with you guys later. Okay.
All right.